So tonight I'm going to give a little talk about managing state in Ember, and particularly about the data down, actions up paradigm that Ember is strongly opinionated about you using when you manage it, your state. And then we'll go through some kind of basic steps, and we'll iterate on an app a little bit so you can see how to move your state around, and we'll learn some things in the process. And then at the end, I'm going to propose that there's places when you should break with the orthodoxy, and you guys can heckle me. So this is me. I've got 4 girls. I do some woodworking and still have 10 fingers. I was also a hardware engineer for like 9 years, and then switched to software. So we should talk after. That'd be fun. And I supported a big Ember app for about 3 years, and now I'm independent doing consulting. So if you have a project when you need some help or some architecture stuff, reach out. So as I said, tonight we're going to be talking about how to manage state in a single page app. And for sounds like we've got a fair number of people in here that are like Ember experts, like who feels like you're medium to expert-ish with Ember, yeah. And then people feel like they're still pretty new. Got some of those, yeah. So for those who've been around a while, like you're like, oh, data down, actions up, Ember, I've heard about this all the time, and you start to feel like this. But what I found is that the reality is, it is too easy, but it's too easy to do it wrong, and then to do it wrong again and again. And so tonight we want to kind of talk about state for a second at a high level, and then we'll get into the app. So it's helpful before we get into this to think about like the different types of state that you have in a single page app. I'm not going to do a deep dive here because this guy, Mike North, did a talk called Enemy of the State. If you haven't watched it, it's on YouTube, and it's fantastic. And in there he talks about like 4 flavors of state. I literally lifted this slide out of this talk. And the types of state here that he talks about is UI state, so it's stuff where like you have a drop-down menu, either open or close. Like is it open or is it closed? You have addressable state, and that's state that you store in the URL, so your URL changes as you move around. Persisted state is like your records that you store in a database in the back end. And then draft state is stuff that you're about to store in the back end. And for the sake of tonight's talk, we're gonna zero in and really focus in on UI state as just an example of how to do the data down, action up thing, and how to think about that model. But if you're not familiar with thinking about these different things in an Ember app, his talk's great. So we're going to talk about UI state, but how do we manage it? And Ember's answer is data downs and actions up. So kind of what does that mean? It means that the data flows in one direction, right? So it starts somewhere higher up in your application hierarchy, and the data flows down, and then anything that needs it can see it and observe it, and if it changes, it can maybe update what it's rendering. And then if you need to update the state, you don't take that pass down state and mutate it in the depths of your app. Instead, you call an action that goes back up to where the state lives, and you modify it there, so that the place you're storing your state and the place you're modifying it are all in one place. It makes it easier to reason about. We could talk for a long time just kind of about like the mechanics of that. Ember Igniter has a pretty good post where they go through kind of in detail how to think about this. And so on the left-hand side here, in the black arrow, that's your state that's kind of flowing down. In this case, it's persisted state, and so it's flowing out of off the network through your application router into your application route, into the application controller, gets rendered into templates and controllers, and then it's finally used down there in this reading list template. And then there's an action in the reading list template that goes back up on the dotted lines on the right, and it goes back up to be persisted state, and then after it's persisted, it would flow back down and update things. So that's the general flow. We're going to kind of work over that a few times, but not with persisted, but with UI state. Again, I think that post is probably a worthwhile read if you're just kind of getting introduced to all of this. So then I thought, well, we could talk about like bad ways of doing it and good ways of doing it, and we'd have this lists and checklist. But that's kind of boring. Like examples are better. So let's jump into some examples. So tonight we're going to build a really simple Ember app. Then we'll add some features to it, and then we'll realize some of the way we added those features is crap. and we'll go make the feature. We'll go make the code better, make it livable. And so I'll put the slides online somewhere, but I put a repository up that has some tags that you can walk through with me and see the commits and see how we kind of modified things. So if you want to come back later and go over that, that'll be there. And then in the lower right-hand corner of the slide here, you'll see the tags that we're bouncing through. Okay, so let's jump into it. So you go into your product owner's office and they say, I have this brilliant idea. We are going to have an app that has users and they can post stuff, right? It's going to be amazing. And so you're like, wow, that sounds fancy. And so here's our tag, demo tag 1. Let's actually we'll go build the app, or pretend like we just went and built it. And here's what it looks like. Really fancy. We have a home page. We have users route that shows a list of users. We have a post route that shows a list of posts. And that's it, right? Really simple app. So we'll go back to our slides here. And so we go back to our product owner. We're like, done, boom. What's next? And the product owner says, well, it turns out the users want some more information about the post. So what I'd like is to be able to see some post details in like a little drawer that slides out on the right, and it shows you the details. So we'll click on the card for more info, and then the drawer is going to slide out. To which you're like, this is really mind-blowing. We're building the next unicorn here for sure. So to jump into this, we're going to build an info drawer, right? And we got to think about what kind of state do we want to store to do that. And so what kind of state do we need to store? Well, we're probably going to need to store like a Boolean, is the drawer open or not? And then we need to store something about what we're displaying in the drawer. So probably we'll just have the record and we can display some stuff about the post. And then the next question you got to ask is, well, where are we going to store it? And so it's maybe easier to think about in pictures. So this kind of hierarchy of our app, we've got the application route and its controller. It has an outlet that renders, in this case, our posts route with its controller, and then the post template is rendering a post list and some cards, right? This is the basic structure of the app I just showed you. So where do we store our state? Well, we're going to be interacting, we want the user to interact with these little cards, and they're going to press a button, and then the drawer is going to pop open. So probably storing the state, we should just keep it simple. And so for now, we'll just store the state on that post controller. And then we'll just render the drawer kind of in the template, in the post template alongside the list. We'll just keep it really simple. So to update our drawing, it looks like this, right? In the post controller, we've got our couple bits of state, and then we're just going to render like in the template here, this info drawer, as simple as we can do it. So okay, what's it look like in code? You guys following me? Where we're going here? We'll progressively get to something a little more complicated. So what we're looking at here, if you see on the bottom there, is the post controller, lines 6 and 7. We're storing our state. So we've got the drawer record there, and then computed property for if the drawer should be open. Like if we have a record, then open the drawer. And then we've provided 2 actions, the toggle drawer action and the close drawer action. So what we did here is we're kind of following the data down, actions up mantra. We went up to like the next highest place in our hierarchy, put our state there, and we put our components there. So we're only going to mutate the state through these actions. We won't mutate it anywhere else. So we're following the mantra. What's great about that is it makes it really easy to reason about like who's going to be updating your state. It's only going to be update right here, right? So this is kind of step 1 is we put this in our controller. And then in our template, the post template that on line 2, we render our post list and we pass our action into it, which is this the toggle drawer action there midway through line 2. And we're using Ember's action helper, which if you're not familiar with, when you pass it a string, it goes and looks at the immediate context, which in this case is the post controller, and it looks in the actions hash and says, I should find a function named toggle drawer there. And if I do, I know how to stitch stuff together for you, right? So we just created that action and on the previous slide. Now we're kind of passing it into the component here. And then lines 3 through 13 is just boom. If the drawer flag is open, we're just going to render the drawer. Pretty straightforward stuff. And then the last thing we need to do is inside our post list component, we need to put a button in there that you can click that will call the action. And so that's this. And so with that, I'll show you demo 2. Which we should check out. And here we are. We have an info button. And when I click on it, the drawer opens and it displays some stuff, right? And I can close it and I can hit this and it toggles. I mean, this is really an amazing app. Like, I mean, you guys are going to want to use this, right?
You can turn it into an engine for us.
So back.
Do I need to sign an NDA?
Oh, I forgot. It's in the open now.
All right. This is mine now.
So we go back to our product owner and we're like, content drawer, it's done. I crushed that. Okay, hot shot. Now we want to create a user profile page. And on that page, we're going to have the profile on the left, and then we want the list of posts that they've written on the right. You think you can handle that? Like, I got that. So as a developer, you start to think about like, okay, how am I going to implement this? And your inner conversation might go like this. You might be like, okay, first I'm going to add the new route for the user route, and that's where we're going to render the profile card. And then second, we'll move our post list component. We'll just add that to this other route over here, and then we'll be good to go, right? Right? Or no? So the thing to think about is, I mean, there is a bug here. Does anybody know? I got a few.
Render all of the posts?
It will render all of their posts, but there's a worse bug in that we've just taken our post list component that we're rendering here in the post route, who owns the state for the drawer and who has the actions for the drawer. And then we kind of naively thought that we could just make a user route and controller and render the profile stuff here, and then just stick the post list. We'll just copy that code over here. But this is pretty intimately tied to the drawer, right? And the immediate context that is rendered in the user, well, there's no drawer state, there's no drawer actions. In fact, the drawer, we're not even rendering the drawer over here. So we kind of end up making a bug. We discovered that quickly, right? So as I said, we're missing the state variables and actions, and we're not even rendering the info drawer. So how do we solve this bug? Any thoughts?
Move it to the controller, or the application controller.
Yeah, so we just got to find the common point in our application hierarchy between these two routes to put our state and our actions so that this stuff can flow down and action can go up. So we're going to move to a common node or a common place in the hierarchy. So what we did here is, pulled the state up to the application route and controller and moved the rendering of the info drawer out of our post route into the application template. And so now all of the drawer stuff is at a common point in the hierarchy that can be shared between the post route and the user route. And if we want to see what that looks like, we can look at that in code real quick. Oh, slides are hard sometimes. Which I'll just do through the GitHub diff because that seems to be the easiest thing to do. So we had to move the state around, so we went to our post controller and we lifted our state out of it, so that got removed. And then our toggle drawer action and our close drawer action, we removed those because we're going to move them up the stack. I'll come back to what this weirdo's doing here in a second. And we move those things up. So we should probably expect that on the application controller, we're going to put our 2 bits of state there. So there's the drawer record, there's the is drawer open. But we only put the close drawer action here. I don't know why we did that. We'll look at that in a second. To really understand, like, why is there this kind of lingering action here, and why we put why there's only one action here, we need to go look at the template and kind of think through it a little bit. So let's look at the post template. Okay, so previously it had all this stuff in it, right? We were rendering the post list, and then we rendered the drawer. But now all we're doing is rendering the post list, But we're still using the action helper and saying, you should be able to find toggle post drawer on the post controller, right? And so in order to do that, we left something on the post controller, that weird little action that felt like maybe it shouldn't have been there. So again, we're at the post controller, and we took everything off, but we kind of put this little action here. And then within that, we're calling this.send, which will send an action to up the bubbling hierarchy in Ember. So in this case, we're on the post controller, so it's going to go look at the post route for that action. If it doesn't find it there, it'll go up to the next route in the hierarchy and the next route. In this case, the route above it is the application route. So we will find toggle drawer action actually defined on the application route. Which route is down here. So here's our application route where we'll find the toggle drawer action. And in there, instead of setting the state on itself, it sets the state on the controller, that it's on its controller. So this got a little messier, right? Like, it was really clean and pretty when the drawer state and the actions were all in one controller, but to move it up the hierarchy, we ended up making things a little messier. Now the state lives on the application controller, one of the actions lives there, and then one of the actions lives on the application route. Okay, we did that, it works. Let's go back to our slides. I found them, okay. Okay, so we completed, it works. I'm not gonna pull up the demo, you guys can trust me that the app works. But we go back to the product owner and say upgrade complete, and it doesn't exactly work. There's still a bug there, and it's subtle. Does anybody think they might know what it is? I'll give you some hints. We moved the rendering from this nested route, right, up to the application route, which is always rendered. And we're storing our state on the controller, which is a singleton, right? So the bug here is that once we have opened the drawer, changing the route won't close it, which is an awkward, maybe pretty awkward user experience. Where's my app? There's the app. What did that say? We're on 4? I think we're on 4. And that it would look something like this. We open up the drawer, and then we're like, okay, I want to go look at the user's route, and now we're on a list with the informational drawer that has nothing to do with what's in the main part of the app. So that's not great, but we got to fix that. How do we fix it? There's a couple of options. Option A is we could say, well, the problem is that the drawer doesn't close when the route changes, so let's close the drawer when the route changes, right? But there's another option where you say, well, really, if we take the list out of the DOM, we should close the drawer. So we could solve it either way. For the sake of this talk, we're going to go with option B, where we close the drawer before destroying the post list component. So tag demo 5. For the sake of time, I'm not actually going to load up the app and show you, but the change does fix it. You get pulled on another project, 3 months go by, at that point you've forgotten all about the drawer implementation, where you stored the state, you've eaten some pizza, the weird kind of action stitching that we've done, like it's all out of sight, out of mind. And you come back and the product owner says, our users are idiots and they have made some really embarrassing posts and they're really mad that they can't delete them. We need to fix this immediately. Give us a delete button. So now you've forgotten about the drawer state and you're under the gun to deliver something that has customer value. And so, of course you're like, oh, really? Like users would do something dumb? So anyway, so you think about your implementation plan. You're like, actually, this is pretty simple. I'll bang this out pretty fast. We'll make a post item component that kind of can encapsulate some stuff for us, like having a delete post action on it for us. And then we'll add a delete button to the component, and then then we're done, right? Yeah, no, I don't know. Did we just introduce another bug? Yeah, like if what happens when the drawer is open and you delete that post, and now the record that you're using as part of your state is gone, right? Do you guys want to see that in the app, or do you? Yeah. Okay, let's see the bug. Show you the broken. So here's the app. We're on number 6. By the way, don't you just love how fast the Ember app rebuilds and reloads for you? So we open up our posts, and we now have a delete button, which is awesome, and we can delete, and the post goes away, and it worked. If we open up the info button, and then we delete, though, weirdness. The thing's still open because it was going through a relationship to get the user details. Like half of the content is there and half of it's not, and it's a mess. So we got to fix that. Let's think about how to fix that. So we made ourselves a nasty bug, and we need to solve that, right? So basically, we need to close the drawer when we delete the post. So we step into our post item component, and in the delete post action, on line 8, we say get the close drawer action that's going to be passed into us, and call the function and pass in the post. That's pretty straightforward. So that's kind of step 1. And then step 2, we have to pass that action into the post item. So we pop open our post list component on the bottom here, and we add line 4 where we pass in the closed drawer action. And then for step 3 is the step where we might forget to deal with something here, right? Because if you recall, our close drawer action previously was really pretty dumb. It didn't have any parameters. If you called it, it closed, right? And now we're adding a complexity to say, if we call it and you have the drawer open with the record I send you, then close the drawer, right? So our function signature just changed. We have a parameter on it. And it would be really easy to forget that to do step 3, where in step 3 we have to go into the post controller and the user controller where we have these kind of weird stitching actions and change the function signature to pass the record through. And if you did forget to do that, well, JavaScript doesn't care. JavaScript function doesn't care how many parameters you send it. You're not going to get an error. It's just not going to work right. So you might remember to do it in the post route and then forget to do it in the other. At any rate, you slowly, as the app grows, you could slowly start to introduce like these kind of weird, really hard to notice and debug issues. So that's step 3. And then step 4, we actually have to update our application route where the closed drawer action lives and take the new parameter and then do magic with it. 4 steps, we solved the bug. We can look at the app real quickly and see that demo 7, we reload and get a new set of randomly generated post titles.
Bricks and clicks.
And if we open the info drawer and press delete, the drawer closes and the post goes away. So, bricks and clicks.
There's a job title on the next one too. So you're just sticking.
How to know that you don't want the job. It's titled that.
You have to create synergy.
Okay, so far what have we done? We built an app, we added some features, we made some bugs, we fixed them. We kind of learned like when you do the data down, actions up this way, right, you can create some pain for yourself and your team. Quick progress check. We built the app, we added features, we made them more complicated. I think that last couple features like made me start to feel like this code is not livable, right? Like if this is a really large app and this is just a tiny feature in the midst of like all kinds of other features, and you build them all this way, like the app, I think, quickly starts to not be maintainable, right? You add a feature and you introduce a bug, and you have a mess on your hands. So let's step back and figure out how to make this better, right? So there are some good things about what we did, right? It works. It follows the paradigm. The state's stored in one, which means the state's in one place. The data flows down, and the actions are called to update the state. We're not mutating data like deep in our hierarchy. So we did some of the right things there, and it's fairly easy to reason about. But there's room for improvement, and mostly I think in two categories, right? One is that we have a bunch of polluted concerns, right? Well, what does that mean? It means that like our application controller, for example, it owns the state for the drawer. Like, why does the application controller have to care about the drawer? Aside from it's the peak of our app hierarchy, right? And then the application route has some state actions. Like, why does it have to be tied to the drawer? And then we have to pass the actions down through our hierarchy a little bit, right? Or not through the hierarchy, but we have to, the immediate context where the actions are being used, at least, we have to pass the actions through. So that means the post controller, user controller, and the post list component all are passing some actions around about the drawer, when really those things should probably be totally unconcerned with the drawer. And then the other big area of where we can improve is we have some tight coupling. Like our post list component can't exist without the drawer. It passes the drawer actions around, it closes the drawer when it's destroyed, and then our post item, it explicitly calls drawer open when you press the info button, and it explicitly calls drawer close when we delete an item, right? And I'll talk in a minute about why that's problematic. But I said a lot of words, so let's look at some pictures just to make it easier, because I think better in pictures. So here's our app. We have the application route. We've got some actions up there related to the drawer. We've got our application controller. It's got the state, and it passes some actions around. Then it's rendering in its template the information drawer, right? But it also has an outlet in it that renders the nested routes. And this will take the example of the post controller, but it also renders like the user route and the user's route. And so the post route, it's passing those actions around, and the post list component is passing actions inside its template around to pass it into the items. And then it has this interaction where it's got to know that it's got to close the drawer when it's destroyed. And then our post items, they have a bunch of interactions, right? Click an info button and it's got to toggle the drawer. And when you delete the post, it's got to know to close the drawer. So the big question is, how do we make that better? Anybody have approaches they've used in the past? Yeah. So you could do an outer component that kind of wraps up maybe the outlet that the nested routes are rendered in. So it's not a bad idea. We've done that in a few places in app I've worked on. So you would create that component, and you'd move the state and the actions there, and then pass that around. So I took a little bit different approach through this talk, though. What I did is I moved the state and actions into a service. And then I created an info drawer component so that the application controller and context doesn't have to know how to pass stuff into the information drawer, because once the info drawer is a component, then I can use dependency injection to inject the service directly into the information drawer and into the things that need to call the actions, right? So I don't know, examples, we'll talk about examples. Why is that good? So we create our info drawer state. What's great about this is the class name tells it all. Like, what does it do? It's single purpose. It manages the state of our info drawer, right? And so we'll slap our state over there, which means we get to, if you watch the controller, application controller, we get to pull our state out of that. So that's a win. And then we're going to add our actions into the service, which means we get to start pulling our actions out of all these other things. Man, that starts to feel a lot better, right? Like a lot. I don't have all this pollution of concerns. And then we'll turn the component, the drawer that we were just rendering in line, we turn that into a component and we inject the service. And then now we're going to work on the post list and the post item a little bit. And really, if you think there's some redundancy that happens here, right, where we're saying close the drawer on destroy of the post list, and then close the drawer when we delete the posts, because deleting the post removes the item. So we could simplify that up a little bit. And by doing so, we make the post list ignorant of the drawer, which is what we're after, right? So we inject the service into the post item. We now have, we could now move the interaction to close the drawer when we get destroyed down from the post list to the item. And really, even still, those last two bullets, close the drawer when we delete the post and close when we destroy the item, like those are redundant, so we get to clean those up a little bit. And here we are. And there's a tag here if you want to look at the diff for that. It's actually still fairly small amount of code to make this change. And that feels pretty good to me. What do you guys think? Like, we solved a lot of problems. It's a lot simpler. We're still following the paradigm, right? We have the service. It owns the state. It's the only thing that mutates the state. And then if something needs to interact with it, it gets the state from the service through the service, the dependency injection of the service. And if it needs to update the state, it does the same thing. So feels like a pretty big win to me. So victory, I don't know. I'm still a little unhappy with something though, right? Anybody know what that is?
Services are global and singletary.
Oh, they are, but we're storing state on a controller, and it's
still worse than what you have before in that term, in that regard.
Anybody else have? What I don't like is that is this, right? That our post item is still intimately tied to the drawer implementation, right? Because I could easily imagine like two scenarios, and this played out in the app that I worked on for a long time. One is that post item component over time becomes much more complicated, and it turns into a higher order component that does things like transforms itself into an inline edit and does all this other crazy stuff, right? Or maybe you start to have nested posts, right? And now, like, you have the post item has become this really complicated class, and on it, and the whole time it's like intimately tied to the drawer, right? And so in that case, it might be really nice to be able to pass in the actions for these interactions and not have to inject the dependency explicitly. And then in that case, you could literally take the post item and put it over in like a post show page and pass in actions that have it do something entirely different when you click the info button. And that would be great, right? To me, it's still too tightly coupled. But what do you do about it? What do you do about it? Ideally, like I said, I'd like it to look something like this for the implementation of it, where instead of instead of the post item having like this really explicit drawer-related actions of like close the drawer and toggle the drawer open, like it gets something really generic. So the item is dumb, right? Like when I'm destroyed, I'm going to call onDestroy element and it will do something and I don't care, right? And when someone clicks the info button, I'm going to call this action and that's going to do something and I don't have to care, right? I mean, that would be great. But the problem with this is to do this, you've got the action helper that you pass in the name of the action, and it's going to go look on the context to find that action, and now you have to pollute the context to pull this off, and we're back in the whole mess we were in before. If only we could have this implementation without polluting the context, then we've got the big win, right? And here's where I suggest breaking with orthodoxy. So in order to not pollute the context, you can't look up for the action. You've got to look sideways. And maybe the implementation might look something like this. So instead of using Ember's native action helper, which looks on the parent context for the action, we have something like a wormhole action that goes and looks for the action sideways somewhere else in the app. And there's no coupling with the post item. There's no coupling to the context, the post list, like it makes it clean. But is this a good idea? Like, should we do this? Should we dare to like have parts of our app that don't always look up for the actions? I don't know. I experimented with it and have this concept actually in a production app in some really complicated stuff, like series of nested items that open a little floating action button with a form and auto-populate content in it. And it actually, it works great. So to pull that off, I made an add-on. Hence the jokes earlier about this will be a talk about a new add-on. And here it is. Called Ember Wormhole Action. An Ember add-on for setting actions sideways. To use it, it's really simple. If you have a component or a controller where you have an action that you want to be wormhole actionable, you mix in the mix-in from this add-on and define one property to kind of articulate how to publish the action as wormhole actionable. And then you use the wormhole action template like we just saw in our hypothetical slide a second ago. Let's implement it in pictures. And we would mix in wormhole actionable into our drawer, info drawer, which means, and now we get to remove our injected service from the post item. We get to make our interactions dumb. And now that item is like truly reusable in our app, right? And so I like the way that feels. So that's the way it looks in pictures. Let's look at how it looks in code real quick by doing this. We'll look at a GitHub diff again, and it's less than 30 lines of code changed to change the behavior at this point. Our info drawer component, we import wormhole actionable from our mixin. We mix it into our component, and then we define a wormhole actionable actions property, which is an array, and each item should define an action property, which defines the name of the action, the function in your actions hash, right? So toggle open is going to match a function in the actions hash here, and close is going to match one here. And then the name is the published wormhole actionable name. And so that's it. These are now wormhole actionable actions. And then in the post item component, right, here's where we're removing our injected service. We're making will destroy element dumb, and we're saying, hey, if you pass, we go get the passed in property, and we say, hey, if you passed one in, I'll call you. I don't know what you do, but I'm gonna do it, right? And then we get to remove the toggle drawer because we can just deal with that with toggling the drawer in the template, which is here. Toggle info, which will be passed in, and then in the post list, we pass in will destroy element and toggle info. We give it the wormhole actions instead of the Ember actions, and it works. So quick demo. And actually, working means nothing changes.
It's livable.
But now it's livable. What did I do? Yes, thank you.
New dependencies.
3 months later.
Man.
Just use yarn.
I almost put yarn on this for. Anyway, what am I doing? We're going through all this waiting just to see that nothing changes. It works. You can check out the repository and do it on your own. So with that, we rapidly approached the end of the talk. We learned a little bit of how to manage state in an Ember app. We built a really simple app. We added some features which got surprisingly complicated, even though they're very simple features, right? And then we did some refactoring to come up with a way to make it more livable. and less brittle, but we kind of stuck to the idiomatic way of doing it, right? And then we broke the rules to get the last win of decoupling our post item. So I'd love to hear what you guys think. Is this a terrible idea, or is it kind of fun and interesting?
I think it's interesting. I think the data down actions up. I think it's. I think the more important thing is that data goes one way, actions go one way, right? Like, so you still have the actions going into the component, right? So
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like completely sacrilegious to me.
Yeah.
So, question.
Yeah.
So is this meant more for having these actions handle kind of like shared global state of your application, kind of like services, since you didn't put it into a service in one iteration? Or is it more like, don't repeat yourself, if you tend to call the same actions multiple times, you might as well put them into these wormhole actions so that you can only define them once and call it from wherever you want? Or
So this works great when you have like a piece of global state, like something where there's a drawer, right? It would not work if you have like, I don't know, for some reason if you had like 3 different drawers over here, because now it gets harder to articulate which drawer am I trying to send the action to. So I found it to be a useful way to deal with stuff if there's like a kind of globally rendered thing that you want to be able to manipulate without having to traverse the whole hierarchy of your app. So, and the case that forced me to it to begin with is, I don't know if you're familiar with like, Google's material design, like the fab button, like you get the little floating action button in the lower corner of your screen. That's like a plus, and you press it, and then it opens into a form inline there and lets you create something. So there's only one of them ever in the app, and there was places in the app where we wanted to open it for the user and populate it with some stuff, and so it works great for that type of thing. Yeah.
So it's not a knock against your idea at all.
Yeah.
But I do think you have to be a little bit careful with reaching for services, right? Because if the product owner then came and said, well, now we want 2 columns with 2 drawers, you'd be like, oh, crap. I have a service for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Again, I think when it's when you have like a single UI element that you want to put state somewhere, yeah, that's a global thing. To put that on in a service is okay. But you're right. Like if you wanted to have 3 drawers and now you're storing that in the service gets a lot more complicated. So.
Start sending IDs of those drawers.
Yeah.
Which
drawer? Yeah. So you probably wouldn't want to refactor this into a service in that case, but.
Can you not pass the, actually, could I ask you to go back a couple slides?
Yeah.
A question that the answer is probably no. One more for your template, where you're passing, where you're calling action.
This guy?
Yeah. So can you not pass, instead of just close info drawer, can you not say, service dot, whatever the service name is, dot close info drawer? Can you pass that context? So like if the injected service was called drawer, could you do quote drawer dot close info drawer? Quote.
quote is obviously for the action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On that context.
Yeah.
But you could do
You could create.
non-quoted and do dot actions though, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And then can you pass close?
You could do that, but you're still injecting the service onto the context. Yeah. But you could get rid of the little bit of action stitching there, maybe, if you just curried it through. That's a good question.
Would it be possible to wrap post item with like a drawer capable post item, and then only there would it know about the service, and then it would pass down to post item. So post items could still be reused, and it has all the real guts of post item. The only thing that drawer capable post item has is just drawer specific. It basically just makes the link.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I thought about that, right? So basically, if we had a wrapping component that was the thing that knew how to interact with the service and the drawer, then we're probably technically we're not polluting as much the post list, and we could still pass the actions into the post item. Yeah, and that'd be another way to approach the problem.
The problem you run into there, unless someone can solve this, is that then you have to pass down your attributes through that middle layer, right? So if you add something to post item like, I don't know, class, for instance, right? I guess class. But if you added some other property, that just did that.
Well, if you did it as a block, if the thing that interacted with the drawer was a block and it yielded in a parameter, the content of the block still has the context, that outer context, and so you don't have to pass it through the drawer controller component.
Oh, I see. So you have the wrapper render a block, and inside the block you'd actually instantiate post item.
Yeah, and you would yield in the actions from the wrapper. Anyway, moral of the story is there's like a million ways to skin the cat. But these are kind of fun exercises, I think, to think about. And then as a team, when you're working with your team and you're thinking about how to solve it, to try and find consistent ways in the app so you know what to expect. But all right, that's all I got. Thanks.